Well, thank you very much for coming, everybody. I'm here with AJ Jacobs. I wrote AJ an email when I was applying for college, and he replied to my email, and he encouraged me to apply to college. And we had a nice conversation. And then when I was trying to organize this event, I thought, oh, AJ would be great. He's my closest celebrity contact. He's definitely not going to show, but then I'll start working down the list from there. And I emailed AJ, and he immediately said, sure, I'd love to do it. So that's why he's here. He doesn't really know what trouble he's in for, but hopefully we can make it a welcoming community, so he might choose to come back.
Well, I'm not supposed to talk yet. I just want to say thank you, Nash. I'm just thrilled to be here. And I am delighted that my advice for you to go to college has turned out well. That you don't look back and say, wow, that was a mistake.
Yes, thank you. All right, so today we are sponsored by the ISPH. I wanted to read some. Oh, there will be time to clap. There will be time to clap further. We're sponsored by the ISPH. The overarching goal of the ISPH is to conduct large-scale research studies on population health and intervention implementation in real-world settings. The Institute applies rigorous scientific methods to assess the effectiveness and impact of interventions, conducts research that describes population health outcomes, supports multidisciplinary partnerships across all of CUNY's colleges, and provides hands-on research training for students. They even let me in. So if you are a CUNY affiliate, or maybe another member of the community who does research in the area and you would like to talk about collaborating with ISPH or being a part of ISPH, please reach out to us. Maybe Dennis or Sarah is the best person to email, I don't know, but you can go on the website and find a lot of people to bother there. So who here is outside the School of Public Health? Anybody? Very nice. How about outside of CUNY? Very cool. All right, so we have a diverse audience here. All right, so I already gave a little bit of a spiel about how I met AJ, but didn't really tell you what he did. So AJ is a very popular author. He's written several best-selling books. He has a very interesting style that's kind of pop science, but in a way that merges the experience that you get if you're a real scientist to write about the science that you're doing and the ability you have to interact with science as a member of the general public, and that he is not a scientist, but conducts his own experiments and engages with really deep and interesting questions that we try to study as academics. And so he's written several books that you may have purchased or will be available for purchase at all fine booksellers after this talk. And his most recent project, the Year Living Constitutionally, you've done a lot of stuff, littler things, but big book project, Year Living Constitutionally, is a follow-up on two of his prior projects where he really lives all and tries to follow a document to its full purpose, I should say. We'll be discussing all of these kinds of experiments today together. All right, so first I wanted to take a moment to get to know AJ a little bit better. So we're going to start with a description of himself in his own words. I know that I'm a collection of 75 trillion cells, which seems like an alarming amount. Worse, since I barely ever use the Stairmaster anymore, I think I've added on another 100 million cells to my midsection. I'm 60% water by weight. I'm a bipedal mammal, a distinction unique to humans because kangaroos don't count. So first, I have some good news for you, AJ.
Yes.
That when you gain weight, your cells don't replicate typically. You just
There you go.
throw in size.
Right.
So you might get larger or smaller, but the total number is more or less.
That is a relief. That is a relief. Thank you.
All right, but I felt like we didn't get to know you well enough. This probably applies to most of us in the room, so I wanted to ask you some additional questions. So we're going to start off with some softball questions.
All right. I love a softball.
What's your favorite word?
I do like those self-contradictory words like sesquipedalian, which means to be pretentious in your use of long words, or grandiloquent, same idea. So I would say that the sort of the hypocritical word.
Because you want to demonstrate that you're a hypocrite?
Exactly. I want to be right out there and say, look at me, I'm a hypocrite.
What about your least favorite word?
Least it.
Maybe onomatopoeia, they're too honest.
Oh yeah, onomatopoeia, because it doesn't sound like onomatopoeia. Well, I don't know what onomatopoeia would sound like, but I would say my least favorite phrase would be 100%. My
Mhm.
kids say it all the time, 100%. Nothing is 100%.
Well, if you commit to 100% to something, then you're dead because you didn't commit any fractional effort to, basic housekeeping functions.
I love that. I'm going to tell my kids that and say next time they say 100%.
What's a sound that you love?
A sound I love. I do love the sound of the Netflix, like
Oh,
the big
really?
N. You don't? You don't like it? I like it partly because I watch Netflix on 1.5 speed and I love it. It just makes me feel so productive.
What about you hate? A sound that you hate?
My dog has an irrational hatred of this other dog, which seems perfectly fine to me. And so she goes crazy barking. So yeah, I don't. She needs to develop some frontal lobes or whatever the science is.
Okay, so now it's your turn. So the reason that we've dimmed the lights in the spirit of AJ's Living Constitutionally book, I want us all to inherit the emotion of a constitutional convention or a meeting in early America. We're all going to have the opportunity to speak our minds with one another. And that was a relatively large group, so we can't all talk over each other. But I want to have the opportunity for you to, respond at any time, any way that you feel, positively or negatively, throughout the discussion. And so I'll give you some practice. So I'm going to show you some questions, and some of these questions will have sort of uniformly positive or negative responses, but some of them will be more divisive. I want you to respond honestly, even if your neighbor might have a different perspective. Okay. So who likes free pizza?
Woo!
Who likes paper cuts? Yeah. Who likes it when someone holds the elevator for you? Oh, yeah. What about when your sock disappears into your shoe?
No.
What about pineapple on pizza? Oh, wow. That's a lot of pineapple.
Yeah.
That's unusual
My
for New
son's
York
favorite
City.
kind.
Oh,
My
really?
fun. Yeah.
What about ketchup on hot dogs? Oh, that one pretty even split. What about free will? Do we have free will?
Boo. We will.
All right, so there will be a formal Q&A at the end of the talk. But I really do encourage you to ask a question anytime if you feel like it. If you're not comfortable doing that, and you also don't really want to ask a question at the end of the Q&A, or if you have to leave early, there will be some people leaving early, and that's totally fine because of teaching commitments and that kind of stuff. You can just email the question to me, and then I will ask AJ. If you do leave, you won't know AJ's response, and I'll just lie to you about what he said. All right, so I will go through a few different topics, and I'll start each topic with a quote from AJ. I knew a lot of things could save your life: a helmet, a good lawyer, cholesterol medication, but this one was new to me: the ability to read Latin. Ben Jonson, the second most successful Elizabethan playwright after Shakespeare, killed a fellow actor in a duel. The strange part, he invoked a legal loophole called benefit of clergy. By the 16th century, the definition of clergy had stretched to include anyone who could read the 51st Psalm in Latin. So this will start us off to discuss scientific jargon.
Right. So he was able to kill the guy and get off scot-free because he knew Latin,
Yeah,
which is probably not a great legal system, but
I agree. And I would say also that being able to befuddle your reviewers by using language they don't understand, not a good
there you
system
go.
of peer review.
Exactly.
So as most of us, or I'm sure all of us are aware in the room, science is becoming more difficult to understand due to impenetrable jargon. Overcomplicated language alienates the media as one of the problems that we're facing. So I want to ask you, how alienated do you feel?
Pretty alienated, pretty alienated. I mean, talking to you, I will say, talking to Nash beforehand made me, I'm intimidated right now and stressed, but also feeling a little liberated because one, Nash is so much smarter than me, so I understood like 60% of what he was saying before this. And then, but two, since this is about misinformation and disinformation, if he asks a question and I don't know the answer, I am going to model epistemic humility and say, I have no idea. And that will be a very good thing to say. And so if you leave here tonight and you say, that guy had very few answers, and then I will consider my job well done. So that I'm having those two conflicting emotions.
All right, that's pretty good. But specifically on the topic of like being alienated from scientific literature as somebody who interacts with the scientific literature in a very unorthodox way, but to great effect. How do you deal with the fact that you often read things that are clearly not written for you, and
Right.
maybe seemingly by people who don't seem to care whether you understand what they're writing?
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, I feel that that we've got the two poles. So we've got if I try to read a scientific article, often I'll have no idea what it's saying. But then if I read the popular press, then about that article, then it's going to be so misleading that I won't really know what it's saying. So and there are outlets on YouTube that I think uh, are actually doing a good job of sophisticated explaining. Uh, Actually, this one guy I just met, 3 Blue, 1 Brown. You
Oh,
ever
I
see?
love that channel.
Yeah. So anyway, there are
He's a
people.
mathematician.
A mathematician, that's right. Anyway, I feel there are ways to do it. I will tell you my favorite jargon quote, which is from Bill Bryson. He said, "Why call a spade when you can call it a manual earth restructuring implement?" So I thought that does speak to jargon.
Well, this is, I think so getting to the next point. So acronyms what? Sorry, I bolded these things so that I could just read the bold part, but have the rest for transparency. But now I can't tell the difference between them. So of the roughly 1.1 million acronyms identified in this study, the vast majority, 80%, were used fewer than 10 times in the scientific literature. So this is people that are using their own acronym basically only in their own work or only among their colleagues, this kind of thing. And so there is a question about you'd use the extreme case, of course, but there's a balance between brevity and completeness. And at some point, it becomes really difficult to communicate what you mean using only, the 10,000 most frequently used words in the language. But, shortening your sentence to 20 characters using 3 different acronyms that you defined 3 pages ago and never use again also isn't good practice. So I don't know how you feel like this is a stupid question because I think we all agree that we are already erring in one side, that we're making maybe wording too concise without giving enough sort of filler words to ease the reader in.
Right.
But how do you feel about improving this balance? Like, how can we include more material
Right.
without weighing on the attention spans of the reader?
Well, one thing I thought of is that metaphors and analogies can be our best friend and worst enemy. They can be, but I feel that I don't know, I'd be interested if there's a place for that in scientific papers, but certainly when explaining scientific papers, I think analogies are important. When I was trying to explain the Constitution and originalism versus living constitutionalism, I used a lot of analogies. One says, originalism is that the Constitution is like the script of a play and you just never veer from that script? Or is the Constitution more like Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm? I don't know if you know that TV show, but he just gave like a summary of the scenes and then let the actors improvise. Or is it a recipe? Or the key is to make sure you use several analogies so you don't get stuck in one analogy. Because as I said, I think analogies when explaining complex topics can be your worst enemy. Like I think about the hydraulic metaphor for emotions, where you have all these emotions and they're bottled up, and then you have to explode and push them out. And that came from back when everything was hydraulic, the sort of the Victorian science. But I think that's a terrible metaphor because sometimes you do want to let your emotions out, but sometimes emotions are more like a summer storm. Just like let them pass. You don't need to explode and vent your emotions because that's not the way the human mind works. Anyway, that's me as a non-scientist saying that.
Well, that's good. So I do a lot of mathematical modeling, and in my view, like I almost said this in the seminar that we had this morning, but I didn't because we were getting so far off topic as it was anyway. But I don't believe in objective reality. I don't necessarily believe in gravity. We've talked about jumping off out of a window. I believe that I will fall if I jump out of a window, but I believe that there's likely a mathematically consistent set of rules that you could write down that would completely describe all of the observations that we have. I don't think I have the power to do it, but I think that if I was an alien that grew up in, the edge of a black hole, that maybe I would be able to describe the way the universe works using a totally different set of equations and arrive at the same answers. And so this is kind of jumping ahead to the later section, but the question about what is fact, I think, is really only useful to evaluate what a fact is or what a truth is in the context of your ability to make predictions. And I think analogies are like a really, really simple, elegant model. It's saying, this isn't, you're obviously not saying that you're full of, steam gas, but if you think about your body as a system of pipes and whatever, that maybe this is a model that can help you predict how you'll behave in the future, and that now you can take the new observations that you make and put them into the theoretical framework that you've identified based on your knowledge of hydrology or whatever.
Amen. That's all I can say. That was so smart. I'm not going to try to top that.
Okay, this is the same idea. All right. So, and then we talked about this. Oh, but the second half of this question, though, we didn't really talk about. Another problem that we have with academic writing specifically is that there's this expectation of seriousness. Actually, one of the more negative experiences I had when I was at Brown is that I had a undergraduate thesis advisor who was always late or sometimes absent from my meetings entirely. But I won't go into that. Anyways, I wrote a bunch of jokes in my undergraduate thesis because I figured this is not a published article. This is just fun. Oh, he didn't think it was
No?
nice. He called them snake legs. And he said, you should not be writing in this manner because it's not appropriate for academic discourse. And so I removed all of these jokes. And so we, when we publish work, we usually write it in very sort of mechanical language. And we do this because for a few different reasons, but I wanted to get your sort of open-ended statement to how you think academic literature could be both more informal and no more misleading.
That's a great question. When I was researching the Constitution book, I read a lot about Ben Franklin, and he was a scientist of his day, and he was always cracking the jokes. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes about this misinformation and disinformation idea is from Ben Franklin in the Constitutional Convention. He said, he told a story. He got up and told a story about this he said, this old French lady said to her sister, "Why is it, sister, that I have never met anyone except myself who is always right on every issue?" And of course, the idea is because you're not right on every issue. So I think he could do it. Maybe we don't want to bring back a lot of stuff from 200 years ago, but maybe there's something. And I will say one thing I do like about jokes is that they require a flexibility of mind. Like even puns, which are considered a lower form of humor, they require you to see something in two different lenses, which I think is an important mental skill, is to be able to be flexible. And I think science is a lot about seeing things from two different sides.
Okay, so for everybody that's an editor at a journal, I want you to go back to your EIC and say, in addition to graphical abstracts, I'm advocating for a pun. One mandatory pun at the top of the article. In his book, Radical Honesty, Blanton advises us to start sentences with the words, "I resent you for," or "I appreciate you for." So I write him back, "I resent you for being so different in these emails than you were when we met. You were friendly and engaging and encouraging when we met. Now you seem to have turned judgmental and tough. I resent you for giving me the advice to break that old man's heart by telling him that his poems suck." So this is our section on criticism. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about where that quote comes from and your experience with radical honesty?
Yes, this was for an article I did in Esquire magazine, and I read about this movement called radical honesty, which was started by a psychologist in Virginia. And his thesis is that we should never lie, but he also believed that we should go farther, that whatever's on our brain should come out of our mouth. So no filter. So I believe the article was called "I Think You're Fat," which is not something I ever actually said, but it was sort of the idea. And so I tried it as an experiment for 2 or 3 months, the worst 2 or 3 months of my life. It was absolutely terrible. You know, my wife would say, "Are you listening to me? Are you bored?" Bored, you know. It was, so I don't recommend it at all. I will say though, the takeaways were that, I do think that radical positive honesty can be something that we can adopt, which is that brutal honesty does not equal radical honesty. You don't have to be negative all the time. You can, when I was thinking, oh, this guy I used to work for, he was a mentor, he was a great editor. I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. So I call him up out of the blue. And said how much he meant to me. Since we're both repressed men, it was very awkward, but it was wonderful. It was wonderful. So that kind of honesty, radical honesty, I think would make the world better.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I read that it's presumed that people overthink the criticism that a positive comment will be reviewed with, and
Right.
that if we all just walked down the street and said, "Hey, nice shoes," that would create a lot of positive interactions that we're holding on them because we're worried that.
All right. I'm
somehow-
looking at your shoes now.
Thank you.
They are nice.
I wear them to be taller.
uh,
All right. Are there any students in the audience? All right. A lot of students. That's great. So one of the problems that we have with faculty is that we need to get our students to criticize us and criticize each other. And this is difficult to do for different reasons. Students don't want to criticize each other because they don't want to be jerks.
Right.
And students want to criticize us because they don't want to fail. And so we try to create, caring environments. And I constantly, like myself, I constantly end up telling students, like, you can tell me that I did something wrong,
right.
and I will acknowledge when I did something wrong, and hopefully that makes you feel like maybe if this is only the 11th out of 25 things that you did wrong today, you're not feeling so bad. And then I would tell other people, like, I tell the students to criticize each other by saying the comments that you've made are entirely positive and they're all true, but I didn't hear a single negative thing about this essay. And I have several negative things to say about this essay, so why don't you try to preempt me? Maybe you can say it in a nicer way than I would.
Interesting.
I don't know if you have any other advice about this problem.
Well, I have one thought. First of all, I want to hear your thoughts right after because you're smarter than me. But
Stop saying that.
One thought I have is you can say a negative thing in a positive way. I think when I showed my manuscript for one of my books to a friend, he said, more of this. And the implication was less of this. But if you say more, he said, the scenes where you and your wife are arguing, those are riveting. He was implying, of course, that several of the other scenes were not. But it was super motivating and super helpful. I was like, okay, you're right. I do need more of that. So I feel saying more of this, and you can say less of that if you want. But I would say always start with more of this, unless there is 0% of the essay that works for you, which I think is very unlikely. But you can always find something and say, we need more of this.
I think I'm embarrassed to say it because it's so simple, but I think that's really good because I myself I will say this is good, but I never ask for more of the good thing. I only say this is good, this is bad. But if you just say more of this good thing,
Yeah,
that's pretty good. It's easy and it sounds nicer. Yeah.
it does. Well, do you have another suggestion on how to?
Well, we have so much material to go
All
through,
right,
and
all right,
I'll
all
let you have this one as a win. So
Fair enough. Less of him, more of me.
that is what I billed. So then another question for the audience: who here has received an unprofessional peer review, either a grant submission or an article submission? You can be a little more vocal about it. This is a cathartic experience. Yeah, that's right. We've all received them. They're really bad. Okay. So reviews were rife with unnecessary. This is from a News and Views article that summarizes a few different meta-analyses. Reviews were rife with unnecessary personal comments implying that the authors themselves were illogical and unintelligent in evolutionary biology and ecology specifically. 10 to 35% of peer reviews provided to authors contain demeaning language. 43% of reviewers include at least one unprofessional comment. Some journals are experimenting with publishing full text of peer reviews in manuscript, But I will say my own journal, Biology Direct, has reneged on this. It used to make them public and now makes them private. So it's
Interesting.
not making a lot of progress here.
Huh.
So I don't know how familiar you are with the peer review system. We emailed back and forth very, very briefly about that.
I mean, I know what it is. I've never been
Yeah.
peer reviewed or peer
So,
reviewed
you know,
anything.
generally the idea is like, you know, you work for, 7 years on a paper and you bleed all over the page and you send it to 3 strangers who don't care about your work and tell you that you suck and then you don't get any money. So,
Wonderful
in,
system.
in reality, the idea is that you're supposed to send your article to peer reviewers. These peer reviewers are supposed to be peer reviewers, but in reality, they often aren't because they're unable to, the editor can't contact a peer because people are inundated with too many requests. So, you can't get the right people to read the article at the right time. And so people spend too little effort and then often result in making sort of personal comments about the authors instead of trying to evaluate the science, because evaluating the science is too much work.
Right.
And so my view, so here I will interject a little
I
bit
would
of my
like
own
that,
thoughts, and I'll
yes.
have your response on it.
Okay.
My view, and I've workshopped this with a few people in the room who don't agree with me, so I already know that it's up to battle, but is that the peer review system is based on a need that originated in the 19th century or maybe even the 18th century, where there weren't that many scientists and they were doing really crazy stuff, and there wasn't that great a depth of prior experience to build off of.
Right.
And so if you were in an environment where you read the majority of the literature in your field, because you can,
Right.
and you know that a lot of people are doing really wacky stuff that maybe isn't even safe to be doing, much less whether it's valid or invalid, you want to know before you get that to your desk that somebody else whose job it was to review that particular finding says this is full of crap or not. Now, we have both the benefit of a much greater breadth of prior scientific knowledge, so that I believe that on average there's less crazy stuff that goes on. And maybe more importantly, there's such a much larger volume of what's being written. You can't read everything. And the purpose of the editor has become more and more and more to highlight what they think is important or interesting to the reader and not valid. And now it's trickling down into the reviewers. So, I mean, I've received many, many reviews that said, oh, yeah, this is totally technically correct, and I think the problem's interesting, but I don't think it should be published here. It's like, that's not even your job description, reviewer, but it is what's happening. So with that additional context, I don't know if you've got any lateral thinking we could apply to peer review.
I love it. This is a good problem. I would say, I mean, first of all, you could go one way, which is ad hominem the ad hominem. So if you can figure out who the person is who attacked you, then try to attack them, which I don't think is, honestly, I don't think is the solution, but I'm just throwing it out there for lateral thinking purposes. I don't know. I guess one thing I think of.
I will just, as an aside, I did have one article that was in review for a long time. It was very time sensitive, and my postdoctoral supervisor is a very famous guy who never does this kind of thing, got so fed up, he says, I'm just going to send them an email and say, I think you should be acknowledging who the authors are when you consider the timeline for review. And we were rejected the next day. So it didn't work out then.
Oh, okay. So not the strategy. I guess one thing when I think of ad hominem is I try to avoid essentialism. And to give you an example, when my kids say, that classmate of mine is such an asshole, I try to say, well, let's not say it. Let's say that classmate of mine acted in an assholish manner in this particular instance, because people act in very different ways. No one is fully an asshole or fully not an asshole. And if you, sorry, this is not, I shouldn't.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, okay.
All a little bit asshole.
Yeah. All right. Science, right? This is science. So my thought is, yeah, and if you label someone as something, they are more likely to act in that way, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that is my thought in terms of critiquing anything, is to be very specific, not generalize, not label, don't use nouns, use verbs, use adjectives, but try to avoid using nouns. And so if someone said that the writer was unintelligent, that is crazy. That was probably a label that I shouldn't have used, but that is something, you could say, I disagree with this particular hypothesis in this particular case. But to label someone as unintelligent because of one paper they wrote is just, it's a terrible way to go.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is basic advice, but very good and not really well implemented. So in the peer review system, like a lot of times peer reviewers get a spreadsheet where they're like, rank the novelty of this article from 1 to 5. And these are so vague that although you get some sort of weird semi-quantitative score at the end, I don't really know. I mean, when I act as an editor, I don't really pay much attention to these scores. I don't know how most editors feel. But if you were able to apply a, sort of a typography to individual sentences in the course of the review and force the reviewer to reflect, like, what is the nature of the sentence you've written here where you said this guy smells like, an old monkey? Maybe that's not, doesn't belong in your review. You want to reconsider that if it doesn't fit into one of these categories of useful comments that we've allocated for you. So I think that's a good idea. All right. Oh, I like this one. Okay. Genghis Khan. I pay special attention to this one, seeing as my father is obsessed. Odd, since the most violent I've ever seen him is when he staples a big wad of papers. To me, he seems like just another run-of-the-mill pillaging tyrant. Why Genghis? Despite his murderous ways, his Pax Mongolia opened trade from east to west. Thank my dad and tell him that I'm not plotting to kill him the way Genghis' son Jochi did.
There you go. Yeah, that was from my book on reading the encyclopedia from A to Z, and I got up to the Genghis Khan section, and that was my thought. Because my father always loved Genghis Khan, which I found completely incomprehensible. But the argument here was that he did some good. He was an asshole in some ways, but he opened these trade routes and did some good.
Yeah, and actually, my favorite high school teacher, Mr. Whiting, he was a huge fan of Genghis Khan. He had a T-shirt made up for him that said "Genghis Khan is my homeboy" that hung over his desk. So I resonated with with your dad as well. So along this line, what's your favorite? We were talking about ad hominem attacks, and we don't want to do that. But more generally, I think we always have this trouble where we associate the value or validity of an idea with its source.
Yeah.
We'll get to how to manage expert recommendations later, but more generally, we have a really difficult time dissociating ideas from its source. So what is your favorite idea that originates from a questionable
I love that.
source?
And I've given, and I believe, I could be wrong, that is called the genetic fallacy, that the genesis of the idea should be separated from whether it's good or not. Well, one of my favorite stories along this line comes from reading the encyclopedia and the section on Isaac Newton. And it was,
He was a very irresponsible guy.
he was kind of, he was problematic, but
I wouldn't call him an unreliable source.
no. But well, let me. I think it'll become clear when he was.
I know what you're going to say.
Oh, you do? Okay, yeah. I guess I wrote about it, so not a big surprise for you. But he was trying to figure out gravity, which is a very strange idea. It's kind of counterintuitive. This invisible force. It's kind of magical. This invisible force acting at a distance on an actual physical body, and he couldn't figure it out. But then he was reading alchemy. He went into sort of a rabbit hole and read for years about alchemy, which is a pseudo, although actually one scientist told me now alchemy is real because you can shoot protons into lead and turn it into gold.
Don't know that people working on the standard model call themselves alchemists.
Fair enough. So he was reading about alchemy and all the magical forces that act at a distance. And that's what clicked in him and said, okay, well, maybe this is how gravity works. So reading about something that was completely non-scientific actually helped him come up with this incredibly scientific idea. And that's why I love to read widely, even things I totally disagree with, even things that I know are probably not true, but it just keeps your mind more flexible, more labile. And so maybe that's an alchemy led to gravity.
That's really excellent. And actually, I did not remember that example. I thought you were going to talk about the example of when Newton was studying optics, he chose to sharpen sticks and stick them in his eye, which you also wrote about, if I recall.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, not his best move.
All right, moving to the next section now. At one point, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson started a question to him with the phrase, "Help me to understand," which I interpreted to mean, "It's possible I'm not smart enough to have grasped your argument, but far more likely, you're full of crap."
Right. That
So
was-
now we will move to our section on understanding. All right, so this is a very meta question, but by this point in the talk, you're comfortable and you can tackle it. What do you think is the difference between knowing something and understanding something?
That is, yes. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm going to bottle some epistemic humility and say I'm not 100% sure. I think there are different ways you can approach it. One is I sometimes talk about when the way I do my books is, you can read about France, you could look at maps, read statistics, but you can also go to France and taste the croissants and wear the beret. Do they still wear berets? Probably not. So there is a difference between experiential knowledge and sort of more factual knowledge. But I think one difference is also there's knowledge and context of knowledge. So, and I think that we focus sometimes too much on the small knowledge. Like you can know that sharks kill you can know that sharks are man eaters and they're dangerous. Oh boy, sharks are terrible. But if you put it in context, you keep going up and up and up. They kill 5 people a year. That might be misinformation, so check on that. But they kill very few people a year, whereas heart attacks kill hundreds of thousands a year. Even tuberculosis still kills over 1 million people. Again, check that. But it is so there's knowledge of facts and then there's the context. And I feel understanding is all about the context. And when you sent me this question, I was actually looking at understanding. I didn't look up the etymology, but I thought it was a weird phrase because it should be overstanding. You should be looking down at the big picture, the 30,000 foot view. You should not be under trying to make your way out.
Well, I'll write to Merriam-Webster.
Thank you.
Okay, so
counting
here's
on
another
you.
question. Who understands how a key works? You know, those things that jingle around in your pocket. See some hands? Can you make some noise if you understand how a key works?
I kind of do. I kind
Yes.
of do.
Yeah, people understand how a key works. Well, you understand how a key works. We'll get to that. So we're entering into this period about understanding. We're talking about your book, The Know-It-All, where you read the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 2002 edition, 32 volumes, 33,000 pages, 44 million words. What made you feel like this was the best way to prove your intellect?
That
You
is
can give as much context as you want about the fateful moment on the beach where you came upon this first idea, or
right. Well, yeah, no, I would say delusion is one answer. It is not necessarily the best way to improve my intellect. I say it did help in some ways, but the origin of the idea was that my father, he loves to read and learn, and he started to read the encyclopedia when I was a kid, but he didn't finish. He made it to the middle of the letter B around Boomerang or Borneo. So I thought, this will be interesting. What if I try to finish what he began and remove that dark stain from our family history? And so I did it. And it was part of the book was to try to figure out how do you define intelligence, wisdom, knowledge, all of these things that are sort of related but slightly different. So I don't recommend reading the encyclopedia as the best way to become smart. But maybe read my book. Who knows? But
that is John Stewart's advice on the cover.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Shorter and more fun. So, all right. So during this experience of reading the encyclopedia, you tried to do a whole bunch of intellectual activities, and this included competing in a crossword puzzle tournament, appearing on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and attending a Mensa convention. On getting into Mensa, you write, I order my SAT scores and send them to Mensa. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I get a bunch of paperwork, I'm in. But after a month of this, I start to feel cheap. A few weeks later, I'm in a fluorescent lit classroom. I feel the Britannica has failed me. So you can share as much or as little of this experience as you feel comfortable.
Yes, well, one of the adventures I tried to do was to join Mensa, which is the self-proclaimed high IQ society, and you have to have an IQ of over, I think, 130. But there are, but so I didn't have the right IQ, but I was smart enough to figure out the loopholes. So got in like a side door because if you read the fine print, it says you can also submit your SAT scores, and the SAT scores that they required were surprisingly low. They were like, I don't know, 1,400 or something, which is good, but not like crazy good. So I was able to get in, but part of the idea of that adventure was I think it's weird to fetishize IQ in this way. I don't think it's the most productive way to form a community by saying we're smarter than everyone else.
So why do you think, as a society, we're so inclined to try to measure intelligence?
I want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, I think we are we love quantification, and of course, science is about quantification, but sometimes quantification is not the best. I also think one problem I have with the idea of IQ is I think it underestimates how much we can change our intelligence. I think we're not the blank slate like, they thought, and John Locke thought, we are pre-programmed with stuff. But I think that I feel that I've found strategies to make myself a little bit smarter, a little bit more creative. A lot of people, a lot of my friends who are creatives, they have these they think of it as like the spiritual, this muse that comes down. I am much more like nerdy about it. And I have, here are my strategies for coming up with ideas. Here are 10 strategies I use. Take something and make it as big as possible. Take something and turn it upside down. Take something and replace a part. Like all of these are strategies that I use, and I find that helps with my creativity. So I think the same with intelligence. There are strategies you can use to become better at problem solving. And an IQ, I feel, is saying, this is your IQ, it's what you're stuck with, and suck it.
Yeah, so actually I'll skip the next question and I'll say, because we're kind of doing this at the same time, but I will say that it reminds me of something that my friend in college, Samir, had said. So I used to get into debates with him, and I would say, oh, I think everybody has basically equal capacity. And he would say, Nash, there's no way that's true. I mean, it would be nice to believe, but it can't be true. I said, no, no, no. And we were two math majors, skinny guys looking at a table full of football players, seemed to be having a lot more fun. So I was making fun of the football players a little bit. And I said, look over those football players. Like, they're probably waking up, they think about football, and then they go to class and they think about football, and they come home, they think about football. Maybe about girls a little bit, mostly about football, and they go to sleep and they dream about football. So of course, all they're good at is football. If you took them and you asked them to do whatever we're doing all day, I'm sure they'd be just as good at it. And he said, no, that's not true. But he said, this is what I believe. I believe that our biological limitations are so far away from what we end up achieving that although I, speaking as Samir, am much smarter than any of those football players, it doesn't matter because they have the capacity to outperform anything, you know, they're not limited by their biological capacity. Each of us have sort of the equal ability to take advantage of these strategies, as you say, to do better than you could do previously. And I think that with the advent of more and more memory supporting and information gathering technology, this biological limitations become even less important.
Interesting.
So
I like
I
it.
think you're just right.
Love it. I love getting an A from
So
the
during,
professor.
during this experiment, you improved your understanding of a few really deep subjects. You studied the Pythagorean theorem, you studied Bernoulli's theorem. We already talked about Pax Mongolia, and you also learned how keys work. You right, but all I can think is that yes, he's right. It is amazing how keys open doors. I think back to the diagram in the lock section with all the pin tumblers and springs, and I'm proud that I finally understand how keys work. So we're not going to give AJ a quiz. We're just going to take his word for it. But how many of you have picked a lock?
Oh, wow.
Wow,
That is
okay.
far more than I anticipated.
Next question is how many people are reconsidering if they understand how a key works? But instead, I just find out that we're full of criminals. So this was an example. Okay, so you all know how keys work for real.
And by the way, can I just, I don't want to slow things down, but that was a section I wrote it because I was watching the sitcom Friends, and they had a scene where Joey on Friends says to Ross, when Ross opens the door with a key, and he says, "Isn't it amazing how keys work?" And it was supposed to be a joke, like, look how dumb Joey is. And I was like, no, it is amazing. It is amazing. And this idea of sort of being awed at the ordinary, I think, is a wonderful idea. I try to always try to look and see what we take for granted is oftentimes awesome in the original sense, or just astounding. So Joey's right and Ross is wrong.
Very good. We're running a little behind, so I'm going to steamroll past this part. Some other authors, not nearly as brilliant as you, have come up with this idea that we can improve our political discourse by talking about problem-solving strategies.
Oh, I love that.
Because oftentimes when we're interacting with questions, especially about public policy that are pretty far removed from daily life, we develop strong feelings about things that are not based on our understanding of the way that these things work. But you, in a much better wording, have written on this as well, saying that in the past, when I was talking to someone I disagreed with, I saw it as a battle, trying to beat my opponent down with evidence and statistics. That approach worked approximately 0% of the time. Both of us usually just got angrier and more entrenched. Nowadays, when talking to someone from the other side of the political spectrum, I try to frame the discussion as a puzzle. So it's this puzzler mentality. And so I will let you speak openly about that. But first, to predicate it, I want to ask how the limitation of this approach, I feel, is that if I'm telling somebody, I want to work through this problem with you, and then I'm admitting that I don't know that much about the problem either. And this is sort of discouraging in two ways. First, it's discouraging them to trust me because I've already told them I don't know what I'm doing. And secondly, it's discouraging them from engaging with the material because I'm saying that even if you work really hard and suffer like I did, you still won't know what you're doing. So how can we encourage people to acknowledge the limits of our understanding while also fueling the desire to learn?
Well, I don't think it's a spectrum. It's not like you're totally ignorant or totally understand everything. You can push your way along towards understanding. But I do stand by my words that when talking to someone I disagree with, politically or otherwise, I find framing it as a puzzle to be hugely helpful, and to go in as opposed to an adversarial debate, to try to make it a cooperative adventure. Like, you're both trying to figure out, why do we disagree? What makes us disagree? How do we think we know what we know? What evidence could I present to her or she present to me to change our minds? This is it's much more fun, and I just think it's much more productive than trying to battle, which, as I say, works approximately 0% of the time.
I'm gonna move past this to the. This was good too, though. I don't know.
That's up to you.
All right. Well, I'll read the quote and then we'll move to the audience question. Okay. Before Mr. Berkowitz leaves, I ask him the obvious question: why would God care if we wore mixed fibers? We're like children. When you tell a child not to touch fire, he doesn't understand why, but it's good for him. The notion of obeying laws that have no rational exploration is a jarring one. I've been working under the paradigm that my behaviors ideally should have a logical basis. And so this is getting at the theme of, like, when do we stop telling people to figure things out on their own and should trust an expert? This gets to the next section. But first I ask a topical question. How many people have heard about the new heavy sugar warning label in New York? All right, is there support for this in the room?
I have not heard about it. What is it?
Oh, so there will be a new label on sugary beverages with 50 grams or more of sugar, something like that.
Oh,
It's been a
wow.
long time in the making. 50 grams. Yeah, I don't know why everybody was so modest in the room. Like, I think this is a really popular idea in the SPH community. But anyway, there was, immediate feedback, positive feedback in the public health community. Every New Yorker deserves access to delicious, healthy food, according to the acting health commissioner. This empowers diners, according to the Manhattan Borough president. But the New Yorker says, "Oh, sweet, the nanny state is back."
Uh-huh.
And so,
New York Post,
what? No, sorry. What did I say?
New
I live
Yorker.
in DC. Don't blame me. Don't blame me.
Those
Okay.
are different. That is true.
Where do you draw the line between "let me teach you" and "you have to trust me"?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. I mean, I think we're in a terrible crisis of trust. And I think I talk about this, and I don't know if it's the solution, but I say in a book, I wrote a book about health, trying to be the healthiest person alive. Didn't work, but I tried. And one thing that I took away was I believe in experts, plural, but not an expert, singular.
Would you call it maybe like the Rotten Tomatoes model of, oh, yeah.
That's a lovely idea. That was the metaphor I used because,
This quote is in several slides.
okay, there you go. Yes, that's Rotten Tomatoes, which, as you know, they take an aggregate of all of the critics and say, 80%. So if, 99.9% of legitimate scientists believe in evolution, then I'm feeling like that's pretty good. But so it's not, but you can find, and this is what I found in the health book, you can find an expert with impeccable credentials to endorse any bullshit you want. It's
Twinkie
like,
diet,
what?
like the Twinkie diet.
Yeah, the Twinkie diet, or, when I was at a conference, uh, maybe this is a bad example, but it just popped into my mind. She was a Johns Hopkins professor, and she was talking about women should go on trampolines without bras because that lets the toxins out. And I'm like, but you're at Johns Hopkins. That's a legitimate school. What is going on? So yeah, don't believe in expert, but believe in experts.
I'm ashamed to tell you that after Brown, I went to Johns Hopkins.
No, no.
I didn't jump on any trampolines while I was there. All right, so now we're moving on to the section about persuasion. You write when you're in the Thanks 1,000 book that we are an easily manipulated species when it comes to selecting a cup of coffee. I'm going to move past this. Do you recognize this picture, AJ?
I do recognize that
Can you
picture.
tell the audience what this is?
I believe it's considered the first political cartoon, and I believe it's by Ben Franklin, right?
That's right. Ben Franklin in the Pennsylvania Gazette in May 9, 1754. Okay.
And he was saying all states should join together, or we will not be able to defeat the British in our fight for independence.
I thought this was a really powerful, symbol of persuasion more generally, and so I have constructed a taxonomy of scientific persuasive techniques
Ooh.
modeled after Ben's, not on a first name basis, after Benjamin Franklin's snake. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to look at each section of this snake, and I'm going to ask you to show your support for each of the techniques
that
follow an order of the snake from most innocuous to potentially most dangerous. Okay, so I just want you to clap or say yeah, whatever, when you like the technique, and then as it gets more questionable, you can boo or fall silent or whatever. So who likes dispassionate statistical analysis? All right. What about analogies? You're a fan of analogies.
If some fan and not, yeah.
Emotional appeal.
Mm.
Oh, wow, we're falling off fast here. Appeals to authority.
Well, authorities.
That's telling. Selective emphasis. Oh, come on. We all do selective emphasis.
Well, we do it, but should we endorse it?
Hypothesizing after the results were known. Selective omission. Misrepresentation.
Ah.
Fabrication.
Ooh.
Last, I'm going to point out gaslighting. Everybody's familiar with the idea of gaslighting. This is a common word, okay? I'm mostly using it as an example to make sure that everybody knows that this is a common word. We use it every day, but it will be used for a quantitative analysis later, okay? So who here does qualitative or mixed methods research? All right, well, I don't, so don't judge me on the next several slides, okay? I tried my best. All right, AJ, did you look at these slides ahead of time?
I got to most of the slides, but not to this one.
Okay, so I analyzed your work.
Uh-oh.
And
All right.
I found your use of these different persuasive techniques, okay?
Oh, I'm
And so on the left-hand
fascinated.
side, I'm going to show
Nervous.
you the fraction of based on word count, the fraction of the material that is persuasive content.
Oh,
On the
great.
right-hand side, I'm going to tell you what kinds of persuasive techniques you were using.
This is fantastic.
Okay.
I
We'll
love
see,
this.
We'll see if you're still up to snuff.
Yes.
All right. So in Thanks 1,000, which was a book about showing gratitude more than
Right.
anything else, you follow all of the different people that are involved in making you a cup of coffee.
Right. I try to
Right.
thank the barista and the farmer and everyone in
You
between.
barely persuaded anybody about anything. You were just all sunshine and puppies in that book. You were really, you did a really great job. You did mostly emotional appeal, as one might imagine. You did appeal to authority a few times, and there were some evidence of selective emphasis. But overall, I think that you were really, this was a book from the heart.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
In Year Living Constitutionally, you did a lot more persuasion, but most of it was dispassionate analysis.
Oh.
I was really pleased. Everything I found, you almost always had it. Okay, it's not strictly statistical analysis in this book, but you showed like, oh well, the originalist argument is this, and the
Living
your
cut.
rebuttal is this, and you pretty much provided a mixed.
Look at that.
You did a really
I'll
good
take
job.
that. B
We should all be
plus.
very proud of you. You do enjoy an analogy, but you did appeal to authority quite a lot because there's so many founding fathers that you can appeal to.
Right.
You appeal to all of them all the time.
Oof, that's
Okay.
not good.
Your most interesting appeal to authority was Jerry Springer. So you wrote Jerry Springer, best known for his thoughtful TV topics as I Married a Horse, testified before Congress as a young man in favor of the 26th Amendment. And so this yields to the heart of this disinformation topic. What experts do we trust? And sadly, we are trusting experts less and less as time goes on. So trust in physicians and hospitals has decreased over the course of the pandemic. Trust in the CDC is dropping. And these are relatively older statistics. They're getting much worse, much faster. And on the flip side, consumers trust like friends and family, online influencers, including their news consumption. More than half of consumers' news comes from social media now. And we're not doing so hot. We're doing better than you are. But college professors are below 50% and journalists are below, 1/3. We are not particularly honest, ethical, according to recent surveys. And the reason that we trust experts also depends on the context. So scientific expertise at the federal level is usually voices a reason for trust, but empathy and community activism and commitment at local levels is more often cited. So I want to ask you, when you're writing, how do you choose who the reader should be directed to as a source of expertise? When do you tell them to read Ben Franklin? When do you tell them to watch Jerry Springer?
I would say I lean more towards Ben Franklin than Jerry Springer. I think I have a bunch of heuristics on whom we should trust. Things like, do they admit their mistakes? Are they open about their mistakes? And are they do they use bipolar language, meaning not like bipolar in the psychological sense, but meaning like, this is absolutely great and this is terrible? Or are they more measured and say,
Absolutism.
Absolutism, that's a better way to say it. Or Bayesian, I'm a fan of the Bayesian, even though I don't really understand it, but I love it. So those are some of the heuristics I use when directing people to authority.
All right. So we talked about your breakdown. You did very well. But we only looked at the left side of this spectrum.
Uh-oh.
We didn't look at the broader range of persuasive techniques that you apply.
Oh no.
Now, I couldn't really evaluate whether you fabricated anything or p-hacking and hypothesizing after the results of known, not really relevant. But I could see if you were misrepresenting things. I did find a few evidence of misrepresentation.
Interesting.
Okay.
Let's see.
So this is based on the semantic search that I did, and then I coded them expertly afterwards. So
This is the best critique I've ever gotten
you
in
guys-
my life.
There are some still inconclusive, in thanks 1,000. There are some still inconclusive studies that suggesting a chemical in coffee might be a carcinogen, which overzealous judge in California thought required a warning, which I think is a misrepresentation of this judge's actions.
Oh, really?
But you then write, but I'm going to embrace my confirmation bias. So you saved yourself again.
Ah, very
So
good.
you did
yeah.
not. You did a great
Thank
job. Okay. And then in Living Constitutionally, the misrepresentations occur in these originalism arguments.
Right.
And so you made a misrepresentation of judicial restraint isn't the true purpose of originalism, which I think is not really, I think that's disingenuous. But then in your counterpoint, you make this argument, and you even make a symmetrical misrepresentation about gerrymandering, which I think was a little bit, again, disingenuous. So you're totally even keeled here also. So you have to take that off your tally.
I'm equally disingenuous on both sides. Is that the idea?
You have to be, if you're going to be a jerk, you have to be a jerk on both
I
sides.
see. Got it. Okay.
pudding.
That is a relief.
Anyway, and but there were two real evident, two real items of misrepresentation, but they were heavy and made sense when you wrote it. So here you're talking about segregation, and you make two statements. You say, but they only believed this because they had the wrong facts, which is kind of on its face a hard thing to say. Wrong facts. Something's either factual or infactual. And now, however, we have learned new facts, which again is a statement subject to abuse. But I'd like to dig into these two statements. They had the wrong facts, and we have learned new facts and how they appear in our popular discourse, especially about science. And so now I want to ask the question to the audience about learning new facts. What do you think this next slide is going to be about? What public health problem do you think I'm going to show? That's a good guess, but no. You are actually an excellent person to answer this based on what you're wearing right now.
The red dress, the dress where the
About masking. Yeah.
mask. Oh, very good.
So in April 2020, CDC says, wear a mask. March 2021, CDC says, don't wear a mask. July 2021, CDC says, wear a mask. So most of us, hopefully all of us in this room, would say that's because we have learned new facts. In April 2020, there's a big peak of the first wave. It's a big problem. After our vaccines roll out and we see a reduction in caseload, we can see the case numbers on the left-hand side, right, whatever side of the screen that is, starting to decline. Makes sense. Then new variant emerges with new immunological properties. Put your masks back on. Makes sense. And this, you already mentioned, this is your view on these things. You say, I encourage everyone to admit their beliefs. They should not be derided as flip-flops. I went with the whole quote for a time. But of course, this is what happened. It was derided as flip-flopping. And so, we've just concluded a 2-year probe in Congress that concluded masking mandates were of questionable value, and that we weren't acting in good faith during this time as public health officials, that it wasn't that we were revising our recommendations based on new information. It was that we never really had enough information to make a determination, and we were just happy to, to build the nanny state, as the New York Post had said, with respect to the sugary beverages. But these critiques do not only come from this side of the aisle, as it were, from the public health community as well. Point of criticism has been that these postmortems to try to evaluate the effectiveness of these interventions collectively fail to evaluate which specific policies and interventions actually worked, which didn't, and which may have caused harm, which is exactly the kind of work that the ISPH does.
Love that. Love that.
We can applaud more for that.
Woo!
And yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the language that we're using to discuss this idea that they have the wrong facts. So I asked about the word gaslighting. Everybody's familiar with the word gaslighting. It's a common word. People use it in everyday language. Wanted to compare this to two other words. So this is the relative frequency of these words in the common parlance according to Google Ngrams. It's only about twice as common as alternative facts, coined by a presidential counselor in 2017, and only about 4 times as popular as truthiness, coined by the comedian Stephen Colbert. So unfortunately, this idea of having an inability to determine whether something is factual or not factual is commonly accepted as the way of life now. Are there any other phrases? What do you guess is the other phrase I might show the engram for?
Fake news.
And
Perfect.
unfortunately, fake
Ah,
news
look at that.
is now dwarfing gaslighting. Fake news is all over the place. Okay, so this is a quote you already mentioned.
I already
Dr.
mentioned this,
Rotten
right.
Tomatoes approach. I'll skip through these slides. This is about bringing it into the scientific community, more specifically about the reproducibility crisis. We try and reproduce experiments. We fail a lot of the time, and we can't even agree whether that's a problem or not. Who is pre-registered to study? All right, good on you. But
Woo.
almost nobody does that. And this is a
And
big
it's a
problem.
good thing, right? It's a
Okay.
good thing to do.
And so the culminating thing that I want to leave us on, because we're then should go to a Q&A, but this is like immediate the question, is how do we decide what's a balanced perspective and then what becomes I do my own research? You know, you can say, and this is a big issue because like this is becoming policy, right? You can say, as you gave in your previous example, if 99% of scientists believe that, you know, the Earth is more than 6,000 years old, but one administrator says, yeah, but there's this one guy that wrote this one article that totally contradicts all that. That's new information, and we should be bringing that contrasting view to the table. Why, you know, what level do we have to acknowledge people that are on the fringe?
Right.
And how can we be careful to make sure that in excluding those people, we aren't excluding the book of alchemy that leads to the theory of gravity or alienating people who should be part of the conversation?
Well, those are great questions. I want to hear your answer and your answers. I'm one thing that occurs to me, I think you mentioned Stephen Colbert because he came up with truthiness. He had a great sketch because he was talking about climate change deniers who said that it was not human caused, and he was critiquing the news where they said they had, if you have someone who says, a scientist who says that it's human caused, you have to balance it because it's objective, and have another scientist who says, no, it's not human caused. And he says that is not the right analogy. The right analogy would be to have 99 scientists interviewed saying it's human caused, and then one scientist saying no. And he actually brought, I don't think they were real scientists, but he had 99. He set up a fake news thing where he had 99 scientists on one side of.
This was that, and they're all named Steve thing, right?
Oh, where?
Like he said, I can find 100 climate scientists that will disagree with you, and they're all named Steve.
I don't even remember that
Oh.
part, but that's probably true. So yeah, I think that there, you know, there's false balance and real balance. So we don't want to just say we have to give everyone a voice. You can give someone a very small voice, and so that at least it's, you know, out there and we know it exists. But we don't have to give equal time to every crazy hypothesis.
Sure. Of course, I completely agree with you, but there's an additional problem. So I'll ask another question to the audience. Who here has a graduate degree or is en route to a graduate degree? So we represent like 1% of the country. And so even because like we were talking about earlier, that we now live in a world that's predicated on a huge depth of prior scientific observation, we're getting farther and farther away from the point where, you know, the Taylor and the theoretical physicist are working with the same set of information in prior preparation. And so how do we engage the broader community more effectively when their ideas, maybe even consensus ideas in their community, seem to be completely antithetical to what would not only make sense, but result in beneficial policy as we, the consensus among the experts, know it to be?
Well, I don't have the total answer. I mean, one thing maybe that would help would be to incentivize the idea of evolving our minds, not changing our minds, because that has a flip-flop sense to it, but evolving in new directions and make that. And I think there is a Reddit group.
More biblical metaphor for evolving. You're a good guy to ask for this.
Oh,
Instead of evolving your mind, what's a...
Yeah, because if you're trying to
Yeah,
convince a
exactly.
creationist,
Yeah,
you can't say the word evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess, yeah, growing your mind. Uh, but yeah, I believe, and I,
Mute, yeah, yeah.
what's it?
Well,
What was it?
well, transmute. It's
Oh,
okay.
transmute.
That's not good. Yeah, but trans is problem. Yeah.
But I do think that there is a Reddit, and I knew more details about it like 2 years ago, and then I forgot. But it's a group called Change My Mind or something like that, where you get points not only for changing your mind, but you get more points for um, for changing your mind. Not so you get
Oh,
points for
not make me change my mind. You get points if your mind is changed.
exactly.
Oh,
You
okay.
get so
That's
you're
a great idea.
incentivized to isn't it great that this person has evolved? Because usually, as you mentioned, flip-flopping is seen as a negative thing, which it should not be. You should not, and there's of course you don't want to be changing your mind willy-nilly. You want to be evolving based on evidence and slowly changing one way or the other. But that should be something that we teach kids in science. Like this is what science is. You're changing your mind. You're slowly adapting to this new evidence. And it's not science is these are the facts and you accept them or don't.
Yeah,
Science is
actually,
the
that's
process.
a really good point because a big problem that we have even at in graduate classes, we worry about if we have something that we want students to be able to learn to do, but in the full scale, it would take months and months and months. We give them like a toy data set, and the problem with and this is not the exception. This is the rule if you're in middle school or whatever. And when you do that, you know what the outcome is going to be. I mean, most of the middle school students even know what the outcome is going to be before they do the experiment or whatever. And this is a problem because it gives you the perspective that everything is known before you
Oh,
conduct
that's
the
good. Yeah.
yeah, so maybe we should design middle school curricula where the answer will change over the course of their that's a
Yeah,
good idea.
or they should fail more in their experiments. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip all this stuff on technology so that we can get to the Q&A, but I want to leave us on one note. Oh, shoot. Oh, yeah, yeah, that's fine. All right. So we talked about a lot of scary things, although you made it really funny. But I want to leave us on this note so before we head to the Q&A. So Mr. Berkowitz tells me that you don't just put your shoes on any old way. There's a proper procedure. You put on your right shoe, then your left shoe, then you tie your left shoe, then you go back and tie your right shoe. And the idea here is that if you adopt this ritual, then you have freedom from choice during this period of your day where you can think about other things and feel, sort of more free in a way that is sort of separate from the freedom of choice that we mostly focus on, especially in a public health school for very practical reasons. And so I wanted to ask you as a closing thought, what are some things that we're worried about that, are actually going okay? We can put
Oh,
them to rest.
well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I'll go back, maybe I'll dodge the question a little and say I do love that idea from Mr. Berkowitz about constraints versus non-constraints. And I think it's a balance, like we've been talking about before. Uh, I think just as a writer, I need some constraints. If someone said to me, write a short story, I would be overwhelmed. But if someone said, write a short story from the point of view of a toaster, then I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And I would be able, so I think, I forget who said it, the lack of constraints are the enemy of creativity. So I do believe in that. In terms of what I want to hear your thoughts, because I think you study this more about what we should not be worrying about. I will say, reading the encyclopedia made me think that progress is possible, that human progress is reality. I know you don't believe in reality. Uh,
Objective reality.
objective
There's
reality.
progress in both your and my subjective reality. So
All right.
we're good.
Good, good, good. But I would say, people talk about the good old days, and my thought is that the good old days were not good. They were terrible. They were racist, sexist, dangerous, smelly, and I'll end on a high note, which is that when we're talking about modern medicine, in 200 years ago, cutting edge medicine was the tobacco smoke enema, which was literally blowing smoke up your ass. They would literally blow smoke up your ass, and it was supposed to cure all sorts of things. And thankfully, we don't. By the way, if anyone knows RFK Jr., do not mention the tobacco smoke enema. I feel he would want to bring it back. So let's just keep that between us. But it makes me realize progress is possible. I think we are in a little bit of a dip, but I am hopeful that we are on a larger upward trajectory. I hope.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank AJ, and we are over, but I'm
Thank
sure
you,
we can take a few
Nash.
questions. So I will check my email to see if anybody emailed me during the talk.
Oh. I love Nash.
No.
This guy is great.
Yeah,
He's so
that was
smart.
really, really great, you guys. Thank you so much. I'm curious to know, AJ, if you're working on anything right now. If there's anything coming up next.
Well,
I told you not to invite your publicist to this talk. You have to follow
Thank
very
you.
specific rules. This is a publicly funded institution.
Uh, well, I'm actually finishing an article for the New York Times that should appear this Saturday, if all goes okay. And it's interesting because I talked to Nash a little about it. The premise, which was assigned to me, I did not come up with it, but was try to spend 48 hours without interacting at all with AI or machine learning. And so that's part of it is easy. I don't do chat GPT. I did it like 2 weeks ago. I won't do chat GPT. I won't take Netflix recommendations. But if you go with the machine learning part, everything is machine. When you turn on your water tap, the reservoir uses machine learning for preventative maintenance, for figuring out where demand is going to be. So I couldn't drink water. I had, all of my clothes are sent through AI optimized routes. So I had to wear my grandfather's red and white checkered jacket from 1967. So it was fascinating and alarming. And I told Nash that wait, I got that right? Yeah, I got for a second. I was like,
My name?
Yeah,
My name's George.
that's gaslighting. That is gaslighting. But I said that it was fascinating because I've rarely come across a topic where the experts are so far apart. People saying it's glorified spell check. It's nothing. It's a fad. Versus Silicon Valley. This is the biggest invention in the history of humans, bigger than fire because it's going to replace humans. And I was sort of in the middle. I have moved, I'd say 10% towards this is one of the biggest inventions ever. It really is remarkable. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I'm holding it in a Bayesian sort of sense of I'm waiting to see more evidence. But anyway, to answer your question, I spent 48 hours without AI.
Anybody?
Hello, hi. Thank you for this presentation. One comment and one question. I'll start off with a comment. Yeah, please do not tell RFK Jr. about that part.
Tobacco
it's-
smoke.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. I agree.
listen, you guys laugh, but he has talked about these link between circumcision and autism.
It's unbelievable. Well, I will just say, I want to hear the second part of your question, but I feel I've heard sometimes people talk about the lawyer mindset versus the scientist mindset. He is trained as a lawyer. He has a thesis. He cherry picks the evidence to back up that thesis. And that's the opposite of a scientific mindset where you look and try to find patterns that actually exist.
And my question is, how do you start incentivizing people to evolve in a new direction?
That is a great question. Do you have an answer?
Okay, well, I'll try to turn it back on what you've already shared with us today, but well, actually, you told how to do it. Your question is how do you
How
incentivize
do you-
people to improve?
Yeah, how to evolve their minds in a new direction.
Well, I have a couple of half-baked ideas. One is that to really like a teachers should be congratulating kids when they change their mind. It should be like a badge of honor. This is so great. You've looked at the evidence and you've seen it in a different light. As I hate the phrase deep-seated beliefs. My only deep-seated belief is that we should not be assholes. We should be kind to each other. But everything else is shallow-seated and depends on evidence. So that's one. And also, I don't know, I get a thrill when I change my mind. I feel excited when I learn something new. And I don't know if I'm an outlier, but if we can cultivate that feeling of excitement and adventure that you are learning something that goes against what you thought, isn't that amazing? Isn't that so cool that all of this time I thought this, but actually it's more like that? That's awesome, as opposed to that's scary and wrong and I'm going to reject it.
So I wanted to say this earlier, but I stopped myself, but I guess I'll say it now. But I think that, again, like coming from a mathematical modeling perspective, I said I don't have, faith in objective reality or whatever. The difference between a scientific mindset and an ascientific mindset is that with a scientific mindset, you hold the belief that you can predict the future to a limited degree. And I think that's where most of the excitement in learning comes from, in that you understand something, it feels good to understand something, but because you have a predictive model of the world around you, it can be as simple as saying, like, I understand where to find this tree. So if I go on a hike, I'm going to find more of that tree. That's a predictive model that you've built based on what you know about where that tree grows. And I think that the sort of anti-science perspective we have now is coming from a place of two things. First is sort of an acquiescence that we don't want to think. And secondly, based on this being lost in the wealth of prior observations that we've made so far, like I talked about earlier. And I think that we're not doing a great job in the scientific community because amongst ourselves, we're always arguing with each other about the fact that we can't predict the future. And actually, I think this is a good point. Like, I don't know if you're a fan of Freakonomics, but there's Freakonomics episode about how prediction markets are okay, but most predictors are really bad, and people get paid a lot to make predictions that don't pan out. This isn't because there's no accountability. This is a problem. But on a daily basis, like when you get a vaccine, what you've done is you built a predictive model and said, well, I've read a little bit about how vaccines work, and my predictive model is that I get to go to Thanksgiving if I get this vaccine, and I might not if I don't. And an anti-vax person doesn't say, they don't have a predictive model for the future. They are taking the biblical model, which is I have a set of tenets that have been handed down to me from people that I love, maybe not even trust, but love and respect. And so I'm going to behave in the way that they set out for me. And I will be too free from choices that I could make for myself because I am divorcing myself from my ability to predict the future.
That's so interesting. So I feel it's future looking versus past looking is one way to frame it.
Yeah, I think we should make sure that people are empowered to predict the future. And it goes hand in hand with what you're saying, that they can't be penalized for being wrong, because that's the biggest problem with predicting the future is you're usually wrong.
Right.
And so if you criticize people when they're wrong, they're not going to make any predictions.
Right. I have one hypothesis about why we're in an anti-science period, and it's just a hypothesis, but it does seem that science keeps taking away what some see as human dignity. So first we were the center of the universe, God created us. No, it turns out there are millions of other planets, probably some life on some other planet. We were totally separate from the animals. No, we're evolved from the animals. We have complete free will. No, we've got these drives, we've got genes, we've got all these constraints. So I feel that's very threatening to someone who sees it as an attack on dignity. But my thought is, how can we restore dignity, human dignity, despite these constraints? I mean, we are these amazing organisms, even if we are not the only ones out there and don't have total free will. We are amazing little machines, to use an analogy. And how can we marvel at that? I was talking earlier about marveling at keys. How can we get that sense of awe at something, even if it's mundane, and even if it's not divine in the old sense? So maybe that's one way to get people less afraid of science.
I think that sounds good. Maybe take one or two more questions if they're out there.
I see one.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. Love to have more of this. And can you share some more of your tips for creativity, the strategies you've learned and used?
Sure. And these work for me. I'm not guaranteeing that they are universal, but I find it very helpful to have structure, like Mr. Berkowitz. Every morning for 15 minutes, I will brainstorm. I have a remarkable tablet, which is the kind you write on, and I will take out some magazines or something and just sometimes I'm trying to come up with a book or an article, but often it's just to keep my flexibility, keep my brain flexible. So, for instance, I might see a picture of a snowman in the magazine, and I'll say, oh, what can I do with, what if it's not a snowman? What if it's a snow woman? What if it's a snow non-binary person? What if it's, instead of the pipe, it's a vape? What if instead of coal, it's the little tiny solar panels? So none of these are good ideas. No. But that to me is a lot about creativity. It's a numbers game. You're going to have 95% of ideas are going to be bad, but hopefully there are going to be 5% that are usable. And I have various heuristics on what those 5% are. If it keeps coming back every few weeks, I'm like, oh yeah. Or if I tell someone and I can see their eyes light up, then maybe this is a good idea. But I do think, to use an analogy, creativity is a muscle. And I do think that working that muscle, going to the mental gym every morning, has helped me be more creative. As I say, most of the ideas suck, but there are some, I hope, that are good.
Great. Well, I think that's probably a good note to end on. So I want to thank AJ for coming again, and thank you all for coming out this evening. Yeah, maybe.
And thank you. You
Oh.
were wonderful. This was the best questions I've ever gotten. The most quantitative analysis of my books in the history of my
Send me two
career.
of your PDFs, so I can do the rest of them. If you
Oh,
want.
that's why you wanted the PDFs. Damn it. I'm sorry. I was looking for them and like, damn, I can't find them. All right, next time. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks again.
Wonderful.